Welcome everyone to this conversation. This is another topic centered around workplace well-being. More specifically, we'll be talking about why the future of work really doesn't exist without the topic of well-being. And I'm Danielle Poza. I'm a workplace well-being advisor and consultant. And with me today is Eileen McNeely and Bernadine Karunaratne. And I'm so excited to have both of you here today, and to have them truly because they each play such an important role in this conversation. So Eileen is the executive director of the Harvard Shine program, which is part of the Human Flourishing program as well. And she's really at the forefront of research on the topic of well-being, which is just so so important, and we'll get more into that in just a bit. And Bernadine is based in the UAE, and Bernadine and I are former Gallup colleagues, and I'm just so excited to have this conversation with you, Bernadine. But as somebody who is based in not only do you have such a amazing background just in this field of leadership development and HR, but you are in a part of the world that is always at the forefront of major global trends, in a part of the world that is, seeing just is extremely diverse in terms of the people that are there from all over the world. So I feel like you really bring a unique perspective to this conversation. And so I'm just really excited for the two of you to be here. So let me just read their official bios real quickly before we get started so you understand just how amazing they are. So Bernadine is a global HR strategist based in Abu Dhabi with extensive experience in leadership development, talent management, and employee engagement. Her career spans leadership roles at Gallup, Korn Ferry, and Etihad Airways, where she specialized in organizational performance, executive coaching, and diversity and inclusion. She's advised over 50 organizations across public and private sectors, helping leaders and teams unlock their potential. Bernadine is a sought-after speaker, having presented at major conferences, including Expo 2020 in Dubai and the Government HR Summit in Abu Dhabi. Passionate about making HR a driver of organizational success, she brings a wealth of expertise in fostering high-performance cultures. And Dr. Eileen McNeely is the founder and executive director of SHINE, the Harvard Human Flourishing Program, with a background in environmental epidemiology, occupational health, and corporate sustainability. She leads groundbreaking research on the intersection of work and well-being. She's advised organizations globally on how workplace culture impacts employee health and business performance. And through an applied academic approach, Dr. McNeely helps companies integrate well-being into their core strategy, driving both human and organizational flourishing. So again, thank you so much for being here and welcome. So if we can, I would love to start the whole conversation more on a personal note. Obviously, you have extensive experience and background, which we'll get into, but I do think that this topic is one that kind of, is an emotional one, and one that can be more personal. So I would love to hear from both of you. What does drive your passion first and foremost? How did you get interested in this subject of well-being? And Bernadine, would love to start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, thank you again for letting me share this story. And I think honestly, well-being is a very personal conversation, and it has become an entirely personal dialogue for me with myself. And I think 2 years ago, I had my own sort of wake-up call. Up until then, I believe I was speaking about well-being, but I was truly a well-being imposter. I don't think I was truly living to the values of well-being. I was so ambitiously and passionately advocating to people I work with and people I live with, even in my own family. So 2 years ago, I think I had such a wake-up call. I went into septic shock, did not know what was happening because I had completely ignored the clues of my own health. I was pretty much a pretty well-established workaholic at that point, had a lot going on in life. And I think it took this moment to just disrupt me, pause me, and really sort of re-engage me in a way that I definitely needed. And I don't wish to go through it again, but the learnings it offered me in terms of my own sort of mental health, my physical health, and then the impact it has had on how I am leading at home. I'm a mother of two. How I'm leading at work. I feel like I'm a mother of so many at work. It has really shifted my approach to how if you go from being a well-being imposter to truly a well-being storyteller, it really becomes about your vulnerability, your authenticity, and the extent to which your story can help and positively influence those in your care. And again, for me, it was a disruption that I think was programmed, and I still feel grateful that I got through it in
Um,
a way that has allowed me to say, never again am I going to take my well-being uh, for granted,
yeah.
and never again am I going to allow it to happen to others, especially as I become a lot more vocal now at work
Mhm.
about the symptoms, about the signs, about feedback
Mhm.
that I don't think anyone was giving to me when I was starting to demonstrate that I was not well.
Yeah. And that's like, so there's already, five additional questions I want to ask you based on what you just said. But first, can you explain what you mean by being a well-being imposter before this?
So I think I never looked in the mirror and really made sure that what I was saying, the words that were coming out of my mouth about, oh, I care about your well-being and you need to take care of your well-being. I don't think I was imposing what I was telling to others on myself.
Hmm.
So I don't think there was enough self-awareness going on with my own sort of, what was I portraying? What was I displaying? What was I demonstrating? I was clear on what I was saying. So I think I had disconnected the message from my behaviors and from my everyday.
Yeah.
So that's what I
Well,
mean by being an imposter.
yeah, well, that's really important, I think, because one thing I've noticed in my own work is just that there are a lot of leaders that aren't necessarily aware of the like I call them micro communications or micro behaviors that then set the tone for the people around them. And those little ways of being or little things that they say are either promoting well-being, a well-being culture of one where it's like you care about people's lives, or one that's more about just being about like the work. And it's just I think it's a really important piece of this whole thing, because we'll get into just that role of leaders and caring about this topic. But that's such an important distinction. I've never heard anybody say being a well-being imposter. And then how would you say that looks different for you now, just as a leader having had this type of a wake up call?
So I think in addition to being very open and public with my story, especially as a woman who is in the workplace dealing with both men and women who I believe not just care about their health, but are looking at health holistically. I feel that now I'm a lot more honest with myself when I look in the mirror. And I am also a lot more explicit with what I am sharing with my colleagues. So I feel like it's no longer operating from borrowed knowledge. It's personal, lived moments
Yeah.
that has increased, I think, my credibility with my own sort of, I don't want to say followers, but my communities. I
Yeah.
think people are now seeking me out because they feel that the place I am speaking from is coming from so much experience and my personal commitment now to want to help those who are open to the help, because that's one thing I learned, that I was not ready to deal with it. I mean, I had the best doctors, the best nurses around me, and yet it felt very much like I was alone in this journey. And until I had to rehabilitate my mind, my body. When you go through septic shock, it creates a whole sort of spiral of other complications in your body, where you're literally your body starts to shut down. And I think it needed me to do a lot of work on me. And this is something now I offer to people, similar to what we say about leadership development. If you don't start with your own sort of emotional awareness about yourself,
Mhm.
and then you really start to self-regulate before you start preaching to those around you, that becomes your sort of the core of how you lead and how you really develop yourself, and why you become positively contagious to those around you.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And I don't know if you remember, there was a study on the contagious effect of well-being. And and I believe that so so much that it's like when it comes from a place, as you mentioned, that's really authentic, that's like deep down something has shifted with you, that's the part that becomes contagious, because your outward, your vibe, your behaviors change, how you communicate, all of that, like then has this ripple effect on people. But that's an amazing story, and I'm so glad that you came out of it this way. I find it hard to believe that you weren't, I what I've known of you is that you've always kind of been this way, but I'm glad that from your perspective, you're even better because of it. And Eileen, like you as well, like you've been in this work for a long time, and you're just one of the most committed people to this subject, and your research has such a major impact on the world. What had you really get into this like subject of well-being specifically, and especially the intersection of work, because I know that and in the Harvard Human Flourishing program, well-being more broadly is the focus, but you've really narrowed down on that intersection of the impact that work has on our well-being. So how did you get into this, and what makes you so passionate about it?
Well, thanks for the question. And Bernadine, thanks for sharing that, because it kind of relates to what I'm going to talk about in terms of, excuse me, my personal story. And that is, I am a clinician by training, and I was always interested in making people well and healthy. And that was this thing over here. And what I learned while treating patients was about this thing over here, and that is the world of work, and how much time we spend there, and how many years of our lives we spend there, how many hours out of our waking days we spend there. Is like these things are so connected, and we kind of don't really think about it that way. And I didn't until I was uh, I was treating patients in Appalachia here in the US, which is coal mining country. And I was listening to stories as I was doing exams for lung disease from the exposure, and wondering, why people do this work when it's obviously hazardous. And they were seeing me to get workers' compensation. And so, in listening to those stories, I really learned the importance of work and the intersection, and how tightly weaved this is. Because what the coal miners told me is that they love their job. Yes, it's hazardous, but it forms this bond with their coworkers, that they not only have their back physically, but emotionally, psychologically, socially. They go from work and they have such trust that in their community, they spend their free time in their leisure time with their peeps, their coworkers, because it's so impressive in their life to be able to trust someone that much. And I say this now because we're in this crisis of trust. And we'll talk about how work can either feed good trust or distrust. And we're really trying to sort that out with work arrangements changing from remote or hybrid in the office, and how do you build teamwork, connection, belonging, and trust in that kind of arrangement?
Well, that's like what I mean, what you said is such a important place to start on this topic because I think that, like you said, we don't always take in and like, really understand how much of an impact work is having on us. So, like you said, not just from the time perspective. I mean, obviously that alone is just enormous. Like just to know that whatever we do for work, if it's not having a positive influence on our lives, like that's the majority of our actual lives right there, right? But what we do for work has so much to do with our sense of identity, where we have those opportunities to actually learn and grow, where we might have mentors, hopefully, like the Bernadines of the world who are actually inspiring us to be better. But then also, it's that sense of community, like you mentioned, Eileen, the fact that, you know, in a positive well-being culture, you have, people that hopefully see each other as friends or even like almost family members, people that you would want to spend time with either way, right? And it's like when work is in that positive domain, all of those things are evident and there is that natural sense of belonging there, like that was in these the groups of coal miners, as you mentioned. So that's a really interesting story. So that's like where your whole that's where you originally became kind of intrigued on this intersection of well-being and work. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I learned that you really can't talk about health and well-being without including what people do for work.
Yes.
Uh, it is a necessary conversation, it's a necessary context, and you learn so much about how people navigate their worlds because they're doing it at work or they're trying to do it at work. And it's a great thing for leaders to think about. I want to say just one thing about the social connection. We looked at a number of things that people get from work and the things that they bring to work, and things like meaning and purpose and life satisfaction and happiness and health. And what was really interesting is we looked at this research over time. So you can see what people bring to work and what they get from work and how that is exaggerated over time. And what was so interesting, and it's maybe a commentary of where the world is now, is, and because some of our primary institutions like church or neighborhood and governments, or even how we feel about businesses or organizations, and this back to the trust issue, is broken down or not quite the same as what it was. But that what we learned in the research is that people get more social well-being at work than they bring to work. That like that is that's the garden that nurtures this. And if leaders could really kind of use this in a kind of really helpful way, it helps the organization, it helps the people. But that was really shocking to
What do
me
you
that.
mean by bring? So what do you mean by that they get more than they bring?
So we have a point in time, like before someone starts work,
Mhm.
new employees, and they get we look at all their domains of well-being, including social connection and belonging, which we know is really important for physical and mental health. And we look at those things in the beginning, and then we watch how it grows over time. And we see social connection, well-being, belonging happen more from work
Mhm.
than from home life. It's
Oh, from outside. Oh, gotcha.
yeah. So if we really can appreciate that and how much a garden it is for our overall well-being, then maybe we can think about really how to build teamwork and collaboration. And that's well-being, and that's also business goals for performance and productivity.
Yes. Well, you briefly touched on some of those domains that you've studied. So can you, since this word well-being is thrown around so much, as we all know, and I think it's hard, you ask people for definitions and you get all kinds of things from mindfulness to happiness to being healthy. And So how would you define it, Eileen, from a research perspective? What does it mean to have high well-being, and can you just say those domains
Mhm.
that Harvard has landed on?
So it's been an evolution of trying to come to some universal language about what well-being is. And I can say that because I started decades ago, that well-being used to be preventive health. So lifestyle choices and things that you can do to prevent cancer, cardiac disease, etc. Now it's the aims are much higher. We're not even talking about avoiding disease and disability. We're talking about how you live your best life. And so we're talking, what we're landing on is this concept of flourishing across multiple dimensions. And so there's 5 dimensions that it's arguably not all, it could be more, but we're starting with to just really put a finger or a pulse on this. And it's the first domain is physical and mental health. The second is social connection and belonging. The third is life satisfaction and happiness. The fourth is meaning and purpose in life. And the fifth is character and virtue. And then we have a sixth dimension, which is really conceived of as a driver or a means towards those ends, and that's financial well-being.
That's interesting. And the new one, I feel like, because both Bernadine and I come from Gallup, and we were there when some of the initial well-being research was published from Gallup around the world. And a lot of the domains that you mentioned sound familiar, except for the character and virtue. Can you say a little bit more about that? And that is newer, that is newer research, right? Is that
Yeah. Yeah, that's been really fascinating. I should say that all of these dimensions are integrated and support one another. And the thing I think about unique about character and virtue is it's really a strength that enables the other things like social connection and meaning and purpose. It's kind of like I think of it like, when I said the financial well-being is kind of a driver or means towards those other ends, character and virtue is thinking about the strengths that one or reflects on or nurtures over time that allows us to be uh, outward focused. We actually start with growing our inner strengths, but it's like how we think about others. How do we think about our being in the world allows us to be more connected, more purposeful, more, mentally, I think, fulfilled. So, I think the character and virtue has been really an interesting study. I'll just say one thing about it is we look at things in our lives that may be traumatic. And what we've seen is sometimes they can build character and virtue
Oh,
in a way
100%.
that builds resilience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I wanted to bring it back to Bernadine's story because, if we can appreciate that and really the positive impacts in our lives in this journey of our life, it really does say a lot.
Bernadine, do you want to add to that? Because I feel like that is it is so interesting because I remember the questions from the Harvard flourishing assessment and how it, like the questions behind character strengths and virtue is more around like being somebody who wants to promote good in all circumstances, or feels that like inner sense of resiliency or strength to be able to like handle life circumstances. So, can you feel the connection between what you experienced, Bernadine, and how that has impacted your own personal experience, how that impacted your own kind of sense of, character strength or resiliency?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because as I hear Eileen say this about the data, had I heard you say this before when I was that well-being imposter, I think it would have sounded like good theory, good concept.
Yeah.
Having gone through what I've gone through, I now know this is a non-negotiable for me in how I'm choosing to live my life and how intentional I'm being at work and of course at home. And I think the shift I feel like I've personally been able to make is to go from being a doer. I was always focused on doing, I was always focused on implementing, and many of us do that well, to now I feel this disruption and this kind of wake up call has now reignited for me to shift more of my energy from doing to being,
Yeah.
to really being more present, to being more compassionate, to listening at like level 3 and not assuming I know, and making space. I mean, we another term we throw around a lot is psychological safety. And yet I now know what psychological safety really means.
Mhm.
In those moments where I needed that safety and I needed that trust and I needed that support
Mhm.
from my work family, I got it. I got it from my manager. I got it from my direct reports. I got it from my peers. So, it was
And
interesting.
what did that look like? Because I think that's another term that gets thrown around and people are like, well, especially for the people who don't know how to really create that psychological safety naturally, what did that look like for you on the receiving end of it?
It sounded like focus on getting better, Bernadine, and we'll take care of everything else when you come back. So it
Mhm.
was almost incentivizing me to get better. I mean, there were days when I could barely walk. I couldn't get out of bed. I was in a hospital and I felt so disconnected from everything in life. And having a colleague, it didn't matter who they were, all they did was say to me, we miss you. We can't wait to have you back. And when can we come see you? So, it was that social connection of knowing someone had your back, knowing someone cared enough to let you know they were thinking about you and praying for you. I mean, I felt like I had a whole sort of community behind me expecting me to get better.
Yeah.
And at some point, I was not ready for them to come to the hospital. I went into sort of what I felt like was kind of I needed the work to be able to work on me. I needed that time, and so at some point, I felt like I was isolating myself. And yet, slowly, I had to regain the trust of let people in, let people come in and help you. And here you live in as an expat. Your community is your family, and so it was another power of strength of community that kicked in for me, in addition to, of course, colleagues who were saying things like, don't worry about your leave, we know you've exhausted all your sick leave, but we'll take care of that, we'll address that, your goal right now is to get better. So it was knowing what to say, it was knowing how to receive what was being said to me and being open to what was happening in between.
Well, and that reminds me, I think we all know that question. I know Gallup asked it, I'm sure Harvard asked something similar of like, my company cares about my well-being. It's a really important question on surveys because that one question is tied to so many outcomes. So people are less likely to be looking for other jobs. They have more trust. Eileen, you mentioned the importance of trust. They have more trust in leadership when they can answer positively to that question. And I think it speaks to what you experienced, was that if you're in the kind of environment where you literally feel like you have what I call permission to be well, permission to focus on your own well-being when that's needed, if that there's that feeling of permission, that feeling of caring in the environment that you work, it has an impact on everything, right? It makes you really want to stay with a company like that for the long haul. So on that note, I want to like shift a little bit to, more of like the business impact of this, right? Because this all sounds like this is just great for being a good human, right? Like these are just great. It's great to be this way and to care about this stuff. Just, if you're a leader who wants to just be a good leader, a well-intended leader, but there's also a lot that makes sense about this from a business perspective. So like, Bernadine, when you shifted to being this way in your leadership, what would you say is like the impact from a business standpoint from being that type of leader with your own employees by being the type that listens more or is able to kind of, maybe understand or empathize more or to hear what they're really saying, maybe beyond what they're actually saying? Like, how does that translate into, say, a more productive environment or a more, how would you explain that?
So I think when I wish you could talk to my team and ask them the same question you've asked me. I mean, I know that there is continuing to be a positive impact on engagement of our team,
Yeah.
because we have now made it safe to talk about health, whatever that means for you,
Yeah.
and that kind of customization is what I'm now offering people. And that for me is coming back with a lot of loyalty. I mean, literally employees are saying to me things like, I feel a sense of loyalty, and I want to continue to do what is needed, and I want to go above and beyond, so
That's,
that's that
yeah, that's,
discretionary energy.
yeah. Mhm.
um, and I also feel like I'm now in a place where I'm coaching other leaders. I'm able to now talk to peers who probably are also not looking in the mirror enough
Mhm.
and are not getting the feedback they deserve, to say perhaps you do need some time to get focused on yourself.
Yeah.
And it looks like you're kind of heading towards burnout, or you look really stressed. So now I'm very literal. Like when I see something, I say something at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like I now have more permission to do that. I do it in a very respectful way,
Mhm.
but it's no longer the superficial, hey, how are you? But if I notice something, I'll kind of go back to that person going, I just want to check back in with you because I felt like that hallway conversation told me to do that. And and sometimes it's also serving on those instincts or leaning on those instincts at work
Mhm.
that create more human to human connections where people are willing to be vulnerable,
Mhm.
and at some point they are choosing to also say things that they're probably not saying. And again, it's sometimes it's the need for people to feel like they can trust, and that the environment is so caring, and then the rest is, it's all the little stuff that then gets attended to because the
Yeah.
big stuff is being taken care of.
Well, and that's what I want to accentuate what you said about the fact that because you have this way with your people, and I'll reach out and ask them just to make sure. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll
But
give you all their names.
yeah, I'm sure that, I'm sure that it is what you say. But what you said, what I feel like was so important is that because you're this way with them, because you've created that environment of real psychological safety where they can share either what's going on or just have a open communication and dialogue, there's a sense of loyalty, you said, and that they go above and beyond. And that's where the rubber meets the road on this topic, because it's not just that. I think part of the reason why well-being almost like gets a bad rap in companies is because they think that, oh great, now we have to care about everything that's going on in employees' lives, like as if managers don't have enough on their plate. Now they have to ask about, every single thing in people's lives. And it's not a matter of that. It's the fact that just by you taking an interest, that curiosity in really who your people are, what's going on in their lives. Like I always say, it's more about curiosity than empathy. Is that then that is met with what you said, the fact that they feel more loyalty, then they're like, oh, I want to go the extra mile, or I want to like really produce something of, quality for Bernadine, because she really takes that interest, not just in what I'm doing in this role, but like how it connects to my future or what's going on in my like family life. That culture of caring breeds more productivity because of that, that it's like just that reciprocal effect of people feeling like you care about me, so I'm going to put in that extra effort. Eileen, I want to go back to you because I know that we've often talked about that difference between, those domains of individual well-being, but then there's a very specific set of factors in the work environment that create that culture of caring. So just to build off of, what Bernadine is doing, Bernadine, what you're doing is like just kind of is coming out naturally as a leader who cares about people. But to help make it easier for companies, like there's criteria, there's specific factors that companies can focus on, right? To kind of create that more uplifting culture of well-being, as we would call it, right? Like what are some of those factors that we know would are kind of guaranteed to do that?
And so I can tell you that it's been a real journey to figure out that culture, that air
Yes.
in the room, and how do you understand both how to generate good air or good culture, or how to know its impact. So when we were looking at flourishing and trying to understand, is it a nice to have or a must have? We connected it to the usual business outcomes, performance outcomes, or engagement and turnover and job satisfaction, even disability and sick leave. And we can see, and it's intuitive, but it's very connected. And so it isn't a nice to have, it's really a must have. And having those goalposts out there are as important as the engagement and those other business metrics, because it does say we care about you. And caring, as we were discussing, is really a big deal. One of the things that we look at is not just the relationship between flourishing and business metrics, but also the upstream drivers of what people do at work and how it gets done, as how they feed flourishing and business metrics. So we look a lot on work arrangements and home arrangements, how much autonomy people have, what is the demand on them, how much support do they have from their team and their leaders? But then we also ask questions about this, how people generally feel, not just you and your bubble, but all your coworkers. How do they see management in terms of trust, respect, fairness, and caring? And we put that out there as an outward facing to try and grab hold of a measurement of culture. And what was very interesting to us, and we didn't really expect it, is those metrics of how people are treated in the organization, trust, respect, fairness, caring, is a greater predictor of some of those business outcomes flourishing than things that we typically
Yeah.
focus on, like workload and other job arrangements.
Yeah. And that's what you said at the beginning. It's like that to me is that measurement of the air, the vibe, right? That it's like, are you just in this environment that feels trusting, that feels like people care, and
Mhm.
that is more important than all the other things. And that really is such an important finding because when I talk to managers and leaders and they're like, well, our people are burning out because they're just like they're working too many hours or they have like too much, they can never get ahead of their workload. And we live in a time where nobody's ever going to get ahead of their workload because it just keeps coming. Like there's too much communication, there's like, one thing. So that's never going to be how you solve it. It's what you said. It's the fact that when you're just in that environment, like Bernadine, you spoke to, of like when you're in that environment where you feel like even when things are challenging, it's still okay. I still have permission to breathe or to like not have, not make every single deadline or be like ahead of, but more just that I'm in that supportive environment, that is what kind of carries the day. And that is what then drives retention, right? And does like all of these other, and makes an impact on all those like hard metrics. So I know we have to go in a couple minutes. Maybe we can just end because I want to hear Bernadine if you like I'd love to hear like more bigger picture. Because I do want to hear from you, Bernadine, knowing that you sit in this part of the world that is like a literally like crossroads of the world in many ways. If we can maybe end on like what do we see as like the future of well-being? Like what is the bigger picture here? How should organizations really be thinking about this? What would you say to like, CEOs in terms of making well-being more of a priority. And maybe, Bernadine, like what do you see, or how are people seeing it in your part of the world, and what would you, kind of recommend the direction that people should take this topic from a business perspective?
So thank you.
Big
I would love to say that I'm living in a country where 2025 has been declared the year of community, and a true testament of the way the leadership here is not just declaring this, but are really committing to well-being in a way that is so holistic. Ultimately, it's about strengthening social bonds. And I think, Daniel, you mentioned this already. This is one of the most culturally diverse places I have ever lived and worked in my life.
Mm.
And so, what might look like a complex system actually simplified when you have these red threads that run through. And this is now a sort of a goal for all of us who live and work here. For those of us who are from here, for those of us who are residing here as guests, and it is about community cohesion, and that's happening both at work and at home. So it's creating this notion of inclusive and supportive work environments, empowerment and participation. There's even a component of cultural heritage and identity, and the shared mission in that of respect and tolerance, and ultimately holistic well-being from a very practical way. So every organization is taking this on seriously. And this is what I would offer to any CEO and any leader. First of all, I don't think it's just a leader's conversation. I think every employee needs to look in the mirror and really get clear on what would it take for me to go from surviving to thriving, and how, and what do I need? To Eileen's point earlier, what do I need from the place I call work to the place I call home, and be
Yeah.
very clear about those dependencies and places where you're going to do it. You're leading, and also places where you will have a codependency. And I think we need to just stop the or redirect the energy from all the talk to really walking the walk, and
Yeah.
that's where authenticity comes in. And that's where we really have to benefit adult learners in the workplace. They know BS at a at a drop of a hat, and yet they know sincerity when they experience it and they feel it. And so I really hope that we are coming at this in a holistic way, the way this country is taking it on. And every organization looks at this beyond a program and an initiative to say, how do we create the kind of environment where we could maybe value and recognize those people who are taking well-being to another level,
Yes.
and are not waiting for the organization to tell them what to do, but are sort of becoming those multipliers.
Yeah.
And yet I think at the leadership level, you've got to be willing to walk the talk,
Yeah.
and to really be vulnerable, to be a better storyteller, and to also make space for people to tell their stories.
Yes, I love that. And I have a lot to comment on that, but I know we don't have time. So, Eileen, how would you answer that? Just, what I guess what do you want to leave? Like, what do you hope will be the future of this topic? What would you say to the leaders and CEOs out there about workplace well-being?
So I just want to vibe off of Bernardine's comments about recognizing employee voice, experience, participation. Those are all necessary to building community, and that's actually very fundamental to getting the job done. And I loved her point about having leaders really take the stage and say that how important this is. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And I'll just give one example. I was reading this morning about the CEO of H&R Block, which is a big tax firm here in the United States. And there was this big controversy about, remote work or hybrid work. And they did a back to office. Everyone had to be back to office, and a whole bunch of people quit. And the CEO, in a very vulnerable moment, said, I heard, and we're reversing our policy. And he built so much, uh, so much trust
Yeah.
by saying, okay, I heard you, so maybe leaders can step up and even start with asking for input, cooperation, and build together something together. Because this is flourishing, well-being at work is part of getting the job done.
Yes.
So
Well,
thank
and
you for
then
that.
yeah, well, and thank you. And did you have more to add? Were you I don't know if I'm cutting you
That's
off.
good.
Well, I
Yeah.
was gonna say that is a good place to kind of end the conversation in the sense that that brings back to the idea that there is no future of work without well-being because literally workers like quit because we're now living in a time where people demand more of that balance, right? They demand more of that respect and purpose in their work. We heard of like the quiet quitting trends, all this stuff where people, especially after the pandemic, came, a little bit more in tune with what was important to them in their life, whether it was their health because their health was threatened, whether it was their families because now they got a taste of what it's like to actually be, more integrated with family life and with your, kids and all of that. And so there's like all these trends that are say that, hey, flexibility is here to stay, all that. So we have to get more in tune with people's lives and what they're dealing with. And by the way, top performers, the top performers demand that even more because they know what's important to them, right? Like Bernadine, and say that I'm going to work for in a place where people respect who I am, they respect what I bring to the table, and they respect my lifestyle, right? So, okay, I know we have to go, and there's like so much more I want to talk to both of you about on this conversation. We know we could go on for hours, but thank you both so much. I really do just love talking to you on this subject, and thanks for being, two leaders in this space who are, pushing this message forward and really like living it, not just speaking it. So. Thanks so much for your time today. Any other closing thoughts before we shut it down?
Oh, there's
I,
just so much to say, but
yes,
and
yes.
there was a whole bunch on DE and I, especially now as we're contemplating what that means in the United States and learning from others like you, Bernadine, how you actually build an inclusive community. That's a conversation that I would love to have with us sometime in the future, but I just want to put it up there as an important conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you again so much. And Bernadine, have a good night there. I know it's evening there. And Eileen, thank you. Thanks for all the work that you're doing in the research and driving this message forward. And I know that the three of us will talk again very soon.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.